Have you ever felt invisible? I don't mean have you ever wished you could be invisible. Southwest Airlines did a whole commercial series about that. Want to get away? Remember those life's embarrassing moments where you wish you could just disappear, or you wish you had that, Harry Potter's invisibility cloak or something like that. Just sometimes being invisible is attractive as a thought, and we feel like it could just fix everything in the moment. But no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about feeling like nobody really sees you or understands you or affirms you in the ways that you need. Some of you might say, well, that's a strange topic for Mother's Day. It wasn't a mom who said that, was it? Probably some moms here today who are saying, well, I know exactly why you chose that, or I hope I know why you chose that. I think moms a lot of times feel invisible. Christian speaker, dramatist, writer Nicole Johnson has written a lot. An entire book about Invisible Mom. Listen to this excerpt from her. She writes, "It all began to make sense. The blank stares, the lack of response, the way one of the kids will walk into the room while I'm on the phone and ask to be taken to the store. Inside I'm thinking, can't you see I'm on the phone? Obviously not. No one can see if I'm on the phone or cooking or sweeping the floor or even standing on my head in the corner because no one can see me at all. I'm invisible. The invisible mom. Some days I am only a pair of hands, nothing more. Can you fix this? Can you tie this? Can you open this? Some days I'm not a pair of hands. I'm not even a human being. I'm a clock to ask, what time is it? I'm a satellite guide to answer, what number is the Disney Channel? I'm a car to order, right around 5:30, please. Some days I'm a crystal ball. Where's my other sock? Where's my phone? What's for dinner? I was certain that these were the hands that once held books and the eyes that studied history, music, and literature, but now they had disappeared into the peanut butter, never to be seen again. Have you ever felt invisible? You know, it's not just moms. Sometimes moms are the ones who seem not to be seen. Sometimes moms are the ones who are not able to see. Hillary Price, from People's Church Toronto, an international speaker, Bible teacher, author of a book with an intriguing title, The Life That Changed My Day. Makes me want to explore that a little bit. But Hillary Price, I came across a sermon of hers that kind of inspired some of these thoughts this morning, and she wrote from the opposite perspective. She says, I can remember I used to help in the play school that Matthew went to when he was 3. I was on duty one day, and I sat most of the morning with Matt's little friend Joshua. And Joshua was a very active little boy. And this morning he was very, very still and very, very focused, and he was building a rocket out of toilet paper rolls and yogurt pots, and he built this magnificent rocket. And he had just finished it when came time the end of play school. And all the kids were packing up, and he packed up, but he had his rocket. And everybody went, and Joshua was left there with his rocket, and finally his mom came flying in, and she was obviously way late, and I don't know why she was delayed, but she was the last to arrive. And he just stood there so excited to see her, and he held up his rocket to show her, and he said several times, Mom, look at my rocket, and she never gave his rocket a first glance or even a second glance. She just said to him, hurry up, Joshua, I'm in a hurry. And she started heading out the door. Stop dawdling, Joshua, I'm in a hurry. And he is trailing along behind with his rocket. And as I watched him leave, I saw his shoulders slump, and I saw his rocket go down by his side, and he was just trailing it along, hanging limply there, and it no longer looked magnificent. It actually looked pretty worthless, which is just what Joshua felt, because all Joshua wanted his mom to do was to look at his rocket. And she writes, maybe I saw myself in this mom and it was a wake-up call for me. But I wanted to yell at her. I wanted to say to her, do you know how long it has taken for him to build the rocket? Do you know that he has never been so focused in his life? I have never seen him this way. Do you know he actually built the rocket for you? Don't you see he built it for you? How hard would it be for you to stop for a moment and say, Joshua, that's fantastic. But of course, she never said that. Have you ever felt invisible? Days like Mother's Day can be difficult for a lot of people. It can be difficult for moms who still wait by the phone or go to the mailbox, and not even on this one day does anyone seem to notice. It can be difficult for the single mom. So often, not just this day, but everything geared for families and intact families, and she somehow doesn't fit in and doesn't get seen for who she is and what she struggles with. It can be a hard time for those women who would have liked to have been a mom, and that never happened. And they become invisible in a landscape filled with families and children. Have you ever felt like you were invisible? I want to turn our thoughts towards an Old Testament story. It's one you've probably heard before. It's not quite as well known as many others. We find it in Genesis chapter 16. It's not really about Abraham. It's not really about Sarai, his wife, though they're mentioned. It's about a slave, a housekeeper, a servant named Hagar. There's some of this that maybe isn't entirely G-rated, so it's good that this Sunday is a day when we have kids' church. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she's pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your slave is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? I am running away from my mistress, Sarai, she answered. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. The angel added, I will increase your descendants so much they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant. You will give birth to a son. You will name him Ishmael, which, by the way, means God hears. For the Lord has heard of your misery. Your son will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. Doesn't sound like really good news. But there is good news in the midst of all of this. For Hagar, who had fled from her home, which still wasn't really a home, she was a slave, she was a servant, she was property, brought into a relationship that she didn't choose, pregnant with a child that she didn't choose. She felt invisible. But the story doesn't end there. As soon as the angel finished speaking, it says that Hagar gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. Interesting. Hold on to that thought. Hagar gave God a name. She said, "You are the God who sees me. I have now seen the one who sees me." That is why the well was called Bir Lahai Roi. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. Bir Lahai Roi means well of the living one who sees me. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. So in this story, we meet a mother, Hagar, an immigrant from Egypt, running away from a household where her body has been used to produce offspring for an infertile couple. Hagar's existence, she's been mistreated by simply doing what was forced upon her. She is trapped in a system where she feels as though she is invisible. She has no rights, no dignity, no freedom, no choice. It is very hard to be a nobody with no name. She is referred to by Abram and Sarai as the maid or the Egyptian or the servant. Sarai and Abram probably did not really even see her as a person. She was there to serve a purpose. Perhaps Hagar didn't even know what she wanted in life, but she certainly knew what she didn't want. She didn't want to be treated as a non-person, as an invisible person. And then she has an encounter with God. The God who sees. The God who meets that need of being known, of being understood, of being significant, of mattering. And she names him the God who sees. Interesting question. What name would you give God if you had the chance to meet him? Have you had an experience with God where God became real to you? Perhaps for you, the God who loves, the God who comforts, the God who guides, the God who forgives, the God of the second chance. Whatever name you choose would probably say a lot about you and your need and your story. Because it is often through our need that we experience God in our deepest ways. It's interesting. God gave himself a lot of names, a lot of majestic names. Elohim, the creator, Yahweh, the covenant maker, El Shaddai, the Almighty. Vast and majestic names, but Hagar needs something more than a vast, majestic God out there who she'd probably heard about but never come to know. She needed an intimate, personal God. And she meets that God. And she declares, I have now seen the God who sees me. You get the impact of that? Can you imagine the difference that made for her, the difference that can make for us? And it's not just a matter to say, okay, I believe intellectually that God sees me. I understand that's supposedly true, and I guess I believe it. But the truth of God seeing us, of God understanding us, of God giving us significance, of God affirming us in all those ways is really only beneficial to us when we look back and see Him. It wasn't enough for Hagar just to say, you are the God who sees me, but she says, I have now seen, not with her physical eyes, but with the eyes of faith, the eyes of her heart, as somehow God spoke to her in a way that was real, and she said, I have now seen the God who sees me. We read from Psalm 139 where David wrote the beautiful words about how God knew him, and before he was even formed, God had seen him, seen his unformed body, and David looked back at God, and he had that connection, and he saw the God who saw him, and he wrote a beautiful song about it. What does it mean to know a God who sees us? When we look back and we really see that God and we really experience that God is present, that God knows us, whatever journey we're on, whatever we're struggling with in life, that God sees us, then it's not like the way that sometimes we will try to manipulate children and say, well, you better be good because God's watching. If that's our only concept of God, then we really haven't seen the God who sees us. Not in the way that Hagar did. The God who in Jeremiah 24:6 says, my eyes will watch over them for their good. That's talking about the children of Israel while they were in exile, miles from home, and probably thinking, maybe God doesn't know anymore. Maybe God doesn't see us anymore. We've been carried away as captives. Where is God in all of this? God says, my eye is still watching over them for their good. What is it like to live under the watchful eye of our Heavenly Father who loves us more than we can comprehend? Zephaniah 3:17 says, he will take great delight in you. He will quiet you with his love. You think maybe that's the God that Hagar saw, the God who saw her, who understood her, who loved her. Psalm 33:13-15, the Lord looks down from heaven. He sees all the sons of men. From his dwelling place, he looks out on all the inhabitants of the earth. He who fashions the heart of them all and who understands all their works. We just sang the song, no one understands like Jesus, and it's true. God sees us, and he understands us. He knows us better than we know ourselves. And he loves us more than we can comprehend. He longs for us to look back and to see the God who sees us. 2 Chronicles 16:9, the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the earth, that he might strongly support those whose heart is completely his. He sees us with eyes of understanding. He sees us with eyes of love. He sees us with eyes of pride, like a parent. That's my daughter. That's my son. He sees us longing to strengthen us for whatever we face. That's what he did for Hagar. He actually sent her back into the situation from which she was running. But she went back with a strength that came from seeing the one who saw her. And she faced the same circumstance. She faced the same environment. But something had changed. She had seen the God who saw and knew and understood and validated and loved her. I know sometimes people face things in their lives that say, well, how can God see me? How can all of this be true when these things have happened? How can God have allowed this? For Hagar, how could God have allowed her to be in that situation to begin with? Those in Thailand where Maria is ministering, how could God have allowed them to be in that trafficked, captured, imprisoned situation, and people all over the world like them? Stories of people I know personally, maybe you too, maybe some of you here. Even on Mother's Day, stories of terrible childhood abuse. Either mom was involved or mom didn't do anything about it. And where is God if God is seeing me? And I can't answer all of those questions. I can't answer the why of everything, but I believe that God is right there with us. The scripture that Jane read earlier, not a sparrow falls to the ground apart from God's notice. God sees even that bird when it falls. It doesn't say a sparrow doesn't fall. It says God sees when it falls. Whether the fall for us is our own failure, or whether the fall for us is life knocking us out of the nest, God sees. And God may not prevent that fall, but God does come alongside of us and wants to make himself known to us. Wants us to see him as the God who sees. And then sometimes God raises up a Maria to come and be a friend. And maybe it doesn't change everything, but maybe it starts to change some things. And the doorway to freedom is open. Maybe it's a foster parent who offers that love and glimmer of light and starts a long journey of healing. God longs for us to know him as the God who sees. Not literally, of course, with physical eyes, but eyes that look back and believe. Eyes that look back, as Jesus said to his disciples, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." When you see, you believe. When you believe, you see. Hagar had longed to be seen, and she met the God who sees. I have now seen the God who sees me. I think that's a message that all of us can relate to, wherever we are in life. But I want to bring us back in closing to moms. I want to bring us back to Nicole Johnson and her experience as an invisible mom. Because she didn't end her essay or her book with disappearing in the peanut butter. She continues, one night, a group of us were having dinner, celebrating the return of a friend from England. She had just gotten back from a fabulous trip, and she was going on and on and on about the hotel she stayed in. I was sitting there, looking around at the others, all put together so well. It was hard not to compare and feel sorry for myself, feeling kind of invisible. I was feeling pretty pathetic when she turned to me with a beautifully wrapped package and said, "I brought you this." It was a book about the great cathedrals of Europe. I wasn't exactly sure why she'd given it to me until I read her inscription. Quote, "With admiration for the greatness of what you are building, when no one sees." In the days ahead, I would read, no, I devoured the book, and I would discover what would become for me 4 life-changing truths after which I could pattern my work. Number 1, no one can say who built the great cathedrals. We have no records of their names. Number 2, these builders gave their whole lives for a work they would never see finished. Number 3, they made great sacrifices and expected no credit. And number 4, the passion of their building was fueled by their faith that the eyes of God saw everything. A story of legend in the book told of a rich man who came to visit the cathedral while it was being built. And he saw a workman carving a tiny bird on the inside of a beam. He was puzzled and asked the man, "Why are you spending so much time carving that bird into a beam that will be covered by the roof? No one will ever see it." And the workman replied, "Because God sees." She continues, "I closed the book, feeling the missing piece fall into place. It was almost as if I heard God whispering to me, 'I see you. I see the sacrifices you make every day, even when no one around you does. No act of kindness you've done, no sequin you've sewed on, no cupcake you've baked, no Cub Scout meeting, no last-minute errand too small for me to notice and smile over. You are building a great cathedral, but you can't see right now what it will become. I keep the right perspective when I see myself as a great builder, as one of the people who show up at a job that they will never see finished, to work on something that their name will never be on. The writer of the book went so far as to say that no cathedrals could ever be built in our lifetime because there are so few people willing to sacrifice to that degree. When I really think about it, I don't want my son to tell the friend he's bringing home from college for Thanksgiving, "My mom gets up at 4 in the morning and bakes homemade pies, and then she hand bastes a turkey for 3 hours and presses all the linens for the table." That would mean I'd built a monument to myself. I just want him to come home, period. And then if there was anything more to say to his friend, he'd say, "You're going to love it here." She closes, "As mothers, we are building great cathedrals. We cannot be seen if we're doing it right. And one day it is very possible that the world will marvel, not only at what we have built, but at the beauty that has been added to the world by the sacrifices of invisible mothers." May all of us work harder to see our moms, biological or otherwise. And those of you still mothering, may you be encouraged by the God who sees.